Hello everyone, welcome back to Cloud Pedagogy. I'm so glad you have decided to join me in today's class. Today we are going to introduce AWS Identity and Access Management. We will discuss what it is and why it's important. We will explore the differences between authentication versus authorization. Identity and Access Management or IAM is a part of AWS ecosystem. It's a foundational service that allows you to secure the applications and resources running in your AWS account. It gives you fine-grained control over who can access your account and what they can do once they have access. IAM is a free service and keeps your account and resources safe as well. IAM is a global service, so it expands all regions, allowing you to increase security in the cloud. There are many different parts to and features of IAM. In IAM, you will manage different services which are called identities, and they can be users, groups, roles and policies. Users inside of your AWS account or users outside of your AWS account will be categorized here. Some of these users may need access to your website and services. Along with managing this directory, you manage what they can do once they log in. For example, you only allow them to access orders that have paid for. Next, groups. An IAM group is an identity that specifies a collection of IAM users. You can group identities to manage shared permissions and assign access permissions using security policies and roles. Groups make permissions easier to make for a large set of users. For example, you could have a group named AWS Developers and give that group the types of permissions that publishing workloads typically need. Next, roles. An IAM role is an identity within your AWS account that has specific permission. It is similar to an IAM user, but it is not associated with a specific person. You create a role and define permissions for that role. When it comes to the last one, policy. A policy is an object in AWS that, when associated with an entity or resource, defines their permissions. For example, you can attach a policy directory to a resource, a user, or even to a group. You can manage all these identities using either through the AWS Management Console or via programmatic access through SDK or the AWS command line interface, as we have already discussed in before sessions. IAM is not just for users who log in. AWS services can also be granted the required access using IAM. For example, a Lambda function may need to access another service like DynamoDB, or API gateway may need to access Lambda. IAM allows you to manage all of this in one place. Let's try to simulate this with our real-time scenarios. You are on a vacation and you have decided to go to your favorite resort. Think of IAM like a resort key card. You check in your favorite resort and your key card gives you access to certain areas within the resort, while implicitly denying access to the other areas. Think about it like this. Your security credentials are loaded on this card. For example, your name, so who you are, and the areas you have access to, like your room and the additional locations like the gym. Since the executive launch is not authorized or loaded on your key card, you automatically do not have access. In the world of cloud security, you will hear the terms authentication and authorization. But what do these terms really mean? Authentication identifies who you are, while authorization defines what you have access to. Authentication is validating your identity. That is the I in IAM, IAM Identity Management. When you check into a resort, you provide your ID and credit card. So you are authenticated. You are in, you have access. Your AWS username and password combination gives you this access. Authorization is what you can do or what you have access to once you are authenticated. It's what your key card says you can do. So that is A in IAM, Access Management. Once they let you in, you have access to the lobby, to your room, to the gym, to the spa, etc. etc. but you don't have access to someone else's room or the executive lounge. Each person needing access to your account has a unique username and a password combination. These are security credentials and use strong passwords and do not share passwords across your accounts. If multi-factor authentication is turned on, a token from an authenticator app on your mobile phone is required. This is like a second form of authorization that goes along with your username and password. And it is the ultimate level of security. And you should turn it on for all of your accounts, not just your AWS account. Now once it is turned on, you will need to have your cell phone handy. Following our resort example, this would be when you have to show two forms of identification when checking in. Access keys allows you to access your account without using your username and password. Think that your resort has this really cool mobile app that allows you to use your phone instead of your key card to access your room. You simply scan your phone and you are in. Now you are probably thinking, then why would I ever need to use access keys? Well, they are typically used by developers to make programmatic calls or calls to cloud services from the command line interface. That's about IAM identities, authentication and authorization concepts. Next, we'll try to create and protect the AWS root user. When you create an AWS account, you sign up with an email address and you create a password. The email address you sign up with becomes the root user of the AWS account. This root user has unrestricted access to everything in your account. We will discuss in a later lesson what types of users can be restricted and how to do that. But for now, I want you to understand that when you log into your AWS account using an email address and password, it means that you are logging in as the root user. This root user can do whatever they want in the account. It has all of the powers that can be had. And with great power comes great responsibility or something like that. So, knowing that the root user is all powerful, you should do everything you can to make sure that no one can gain access to this root user. Let's say there is a hacker trying to log into your AWS account with your root user, gaining access to all of the powers and permissions that can be had, and they go and delete all of the valuable data and AWS resources. In its place, they spin up a lovely and expensive operation, leaving you with the bill on you. Sounds less than ideal. Well, how can you prevent that from happening? You could, of course, create a hard to crack password, and that will give you some level of security. This, however, is an example of single factor authentication where all someone needs to do is match the password with the email address and you are in. We recommend them as a best practice that right after you create your AWS account, you enable multi-factor authentication or MFA for the root user. MFA introduces an additional unique piece of information that you need in order to gain access to the account. There are a variety of devices, virtual or physical, that generate one-time passwords that can be integrated with your AWS account for MFA. For example, I personally use a virtual MFA device that's an app on my phone. This app produces a string of numbers for one-time use that I can type into the console after I log into my email address and password. Even if someone had guessed my password, they cannot gain access to the account without the numbers generated by the virtual MFA device. No matter what type of MFA device you choose to use, the most important thing is that you are using MFA at least on the root user. That way, even if someone cracks your password and they cannot gain access to your account, all thanks to MFA. On top of enabling MFA for the root user, we strongly recommend that you do not use the root user for your everyday tasks, even the administrative ones. There are really only a few actions that require root users access. Coming up lessons, you will learn how to create an IAM user and then use that log into your AWS account instead of using the root user. So that's all for today's session. When you are ready, please join me in the next lecture. Until then, see you.